wafana yulindu dismantling ngaphezu kwendaba. Wafana yulindu dismantling ngaphezu kwendaba.
Apartheid really began in 1948, but separating black Africans from the white minority had long been a policy aim. Laws made white people officially superior, and the large black majority faced discrimination in every aspect of their lives. Living, doing business or owning land in white areas was banned. There were separate public facilities, transport and schools. Interracial marriage was banned. Many had no right to citizenship and were regarded as aliens in major cities. Instead, they were made citizens of Bantustans, homelands scattered throughout South Africa.
In the long and arduous struggle for South Africa's liberation, one man played a central role from behind the scenes. Oliver Reginald Tambo, a quiet yet determined leader, shaped the anti-apartheid movement on a global scale. He spent over 30 years in exile, tirelessly working to dismantle apartheid, galvanizing support for the African National Congress, ANC, and uniting freedom fighters across the globe. Tambo's leadership, diplomacy, and strategic thinking earned him a legacy that remains deeply respected but often underappreciated. This is the story of a man whose work transcended borders and whose dream was a free and equal South Africa. Oliver Tambo was born on October 27, 1917, in the rural village of Nkantolo in Pondoland, Eastern Cape. He was the son of Mzimini Tambo, a cattleman and traditional healer, and Julia, a devout Christian. Tambo's early life was marked by both a strong sense of rural African tradition and Christian values. His upbringing in this small village planted the seeds of his unwavering moral code and sense of justice. He attended the Holy Cross Missionary School and later St. Peter's Secondary School in Johannesburg, where his academic brilliance quickly became apparent. Tambo excelled academically and won a scholarship to attend Fort Hare University, one of the only institutions of higher learning available to black students at the time. It was here that he would meet many of the future leaders of the ANC, including Nelson Mandela.
During those days, the government took no interest whatsoever in African education. The buildings, school buildings, the equipment, the teachers were all the responsibility of missionaries. And that is how I got my education from grade 1 right up to the first 2 years of university at Fort Hare. I didn't have to choose to go to Fort Hare because it was the only educational institution which offered degrees for Africans in this country. We could not be admitted in any other university in the country, so there was no choice.
At Fort Hare, Tambo quickly bonded with Mandela over shared ideals and frustrations about the state of racial inequality in South Africa. The two were known to engage in long discussions about politics, philosophy, and the future of their country. Mandela would later recall their deep friendship, describing Tambo as the most brilliant of us all. It was through these conversations and intellectual exchanges that Tambo's future as a leader was set in motion. Tambo's time at Fort Hare also marked his entry into politics. He became involved in the Students' Representative Council, SRC, but his political activities soon led to his expulsion, along with Mandela in 1940 after a student protest. This event further solidified Tambo's resolve to dedicate his life to fighting injustice. In 1943, Tambo joined the African National Congress, ANC, which at the time was seen as a somewhat passive organization. But Tambo, along with a group of young leaders including Nelson Mandela, Walter Sisulu, and Anton Lembede, sought to change that. In 1944, they co-founded the African National Congress Youth League (ANC), injecting new life into the organization by advocating for more radical and confrontational methods in the fight against apartheid. The Youth League's mission was to transform the ANC into a mass movement capable of challenging the oppressive apartheid government. Under Tambo's leadership as secretary, the ANC adopted a more assertive and radical stance, rejecting the ANC's older methods of petitions and diplomacy. Instead, they pushed for non-violent direct action, boycotts, and protests.
Feel that it is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks on an unarmed and defenseless people.
Tambo and Walter Sisulu became particularly close during this period, united by their shared belief in the necessity of mass mobilization. Sisulu was an elder statesman who guided the younger leaders, and it was through Sisulu's connections that Tambo met many other influential figures in the anti-apartheid struggle. Sisulu once remarked that Tambo had an unbreakable moral compass, a quality that would guide the ANC through its toughest years.
They don't listen to world opinion. They're assisted instead by the big powers, and so they carry on. The change that is going to take place is an escalation of the internal conflict in South Africa. And it will come because instead of changing the constitution so as to accommodate the just demands of the majority of the people, they are changing the constitution to perpetuate the status quo.
After the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, in which 69 peaceful protesters were killed by the apartheid police, the South African government declared the ANC an illegal organization. Many of its leaders were arrested, while others, including Oliver Tambo, were forced into exile. In 1960, the ANC's National Executive Committee instructed Tambo to leave South Africa and establish the ANC's mission abroad. For the next 30 years, Oliver Tambo led the ANC from abroad, primarily based in London, Lusaka, and various other international locations. His mission was multifaceted: to keep the ANC alive, secure international support for the movement, and ensure that the organization remained unified despite the pressures of exile. Tambo's diplomatic work was tireless. He met with leaders across Africa, Europe, and the Americas, including President Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, Prime Minister Indira Gandhi of India, and Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme. Under his guidance, the ANC's struggle became a global cause, with governments around the world imposing sanctions on the apartheid regime. One of Tambo's greatest achievements in exile was ensuring the ANC's survival. He helped establish training camps for ANC militants in Tanzania and Zambia, raised funds from sympathetic governments, and worked tirelessly to convince the world that the ANC was the legitimate representative of the South African people. The 1970s and 1980s were marked by increasing violence within South Africa as the apartheid regime doubled down on its oppression. During this time, Tambo was the head of the ANC's military wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, which launched guerrilla attacks against government installations. But Tambo always believed in a dual strategy. While Umkhonto we Sizwe carried out armed struggle, he continued to push for international isolation of the apartheid regime. In 1985, Oliver Tambo delivered a powerful address, calling for a people's war against apartheid. He urged all South Africans to engage in resistance against the regime, whether through armed struggle, protests, or civil disobedience.
On this occasion, the world is with us in support, guaranteeing that we shall win. Amandla! 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 All power!
This marked a turning point in the struggle, as the ANC moved to more coordinated, widespread resistance. After 30 years of exile, Oliver Tambo finally returned to South Africa in 1990, following the unbanning of the ANC and the release of Nelson Mandela. His return was greeted with immense joy by millions of South Africans, but his health had suffered from the long years of hardship. Tambo's legacy, though overshadowed at times by the towering figure of Nelson Mandela, remains undeniable. He built the international framework that would eventually lead to the downfall of apartheid. Even Mandela, upon his release, acknowledged Tambo's critical role, saying, "Oliver Tambo was a giant who prepared the ground for all of us." Despite suffering a stroke in 1989, Tambo continued to work for the ANC and the newly democratic South Africa. His final years were spent solidifying the organization's transition into a political party, and he was one of the key figures behind the scenes in the negotiations that led to the 1994 elections. Oliver Tambo passed away in 1993, just 1 year before South Africa's first democratic elections. Though he did not live to see the culmination of his lifelong struggle, his role in the creation of a free South Africa remains indelible. Tambo's legacy is reflected not only in South Africa's freedom but also in the institutions and structures that continue to bear his name. One of the most significant honors came in 2006, when Johannesburg International Airport was renamed Oliver Tambo International Airport, cementing his place as a national hero. Oliver Tambo's story is one of immense sacrifice, quiet strength, and visionary leadership. While Nelson Mandela was the face of the anti-apartheid movement, it was Tambo who kept the movement alive during its darkest days. Without Tambo's tireless work in exile, the international pressure that helped dismantle apartheid may never have materialized. Today, South Africa's freedom is a testament to his unwavering commitment to justice and equality. We remember Oliver Tambo not just as a leader of the ANC, but as the architect of a free South Africa.